It's all everybody's. Right. We have a short, simple agenda, everybody, this morning. I am told that I'm going to be leaving you. I pick up a great-granddaughter at school who I suggested to my wife, who some of you know is recovering from knee surgery, if she could do it. So she drove the car yesterday and come home from twice around our circle, said I can do everything except put my foot on the brake. So
we don't need everything. What do you want?
He was part of it.
I said, that means you want me to cancel tomorrow's meeting and pick up Eva. I think, well, that's it. I mean,
Right.
I wasn't that concerned.
Overrated.
Take that little lever on the
Eva
side.
can probably drive better than she can, my great-granddaughter. So,
Bad.
having said that, and informed you that I will disappear, I don't know when.
Just showed up, so we're good.
I was going to say, that doesn't look like a Holly.
No, she just went to the back.
Welcome and introductions. We welcome our new father, who's been gone for, what, 6 months, maternal leave? 3 months, okay. Pardon me. That's a lot more days than I ever got for my board. The world is changing. I think everybody else. I think it's. We have two folks here this morning that our hearts have been with. David's wife, of course, passed last week, and Kathy's mom passed the other day, and so we always hold these folks in our hearts forever and ever. Moving on, approval of meeting minutes and fiscal actions report. The meeting minutes for December of 2022.
So moved to approve.
Move to approve. Seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Done and gone. Approval of fiscal actions report for December 2022.
We do not have one this month because Eric
Okay.
has been out with mono, so we'll have that too. Yeah.
Okay.
I know that's still a thing apparently. Yeah.
And,
That will be in February. So that's-
all right, and I'm going to put in the record that we welcomed everybody to meeting number 522, and the date is January 24th, 2023, 10 a.m. at Fort William Henry. And excuse me for doing this. I just got finished. Okay. As they say, I'm out of here. Joe? You're in charge. I will be back.
Okay. So the next thing on the agenda is,
You want to sit right here?
Yeah, no worries.
Arroz?
Yeah, I'm like-
Give me Spanish word I know. That's big man.
I don't know if I can fill the chair.
See you in a half hour.
Okay.
This last one.
All right, so next thing we have on the agenda is Eurasian milfoil harvesting water quality study by Holly Aaron.
Yeah.
Why don't you come up and
I'll give a little background maybe.
Dave will give a little background on this one.
Yep, so we have Holly Ahern and Lynn Hare, both from SUNY Adirondack. Thanks for coming in today. So I've known Holly and Lynn for quite a number of years. They do fantastic work over in the biology department, microbiologist, I believe. And so they've been working on lakes around the Adirondack Park and Warren County for many years, doing sampling for lake associations, for towns, all those types of things. And since we've been, working on our milfoil program for many years, doing very similar types of harvesting, hand harvesting, suction harvesting, there's always an associated impact water quality-wise, but we never attempted to quantify it in any real way. And so Holly and I ran into each other. We got talking about these types of things, and we agreed to do kind of a short-term water quality sampling just to get kind of an overall understanding of, when we're out there working, when we're asking these guys to go out there and harvest the milfoil, what are we looking at for potential short-term and long-term impact? So the three of us kind of sat down and went over some ideas, and they spent some time with us out there this summer. They're kind enough to come today and go over through some of those results. So, Holly, thanks for coming. This is a remote pleasure. Hopefully it will work for you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I was the first one to do that.
Yeah, Holly. Okay, Holly, why don't you come on up here?
This was taken, but closed down.
Really? That's cool.
Rock and roll stories. Who would have known?
Is that you?
You got past that first movie trip.
Well, you know, you should always look down. So thank you for inviting us to come give a talk. What we were looking at was, you know, as Dave said, we were having a discussion about various water quality issues, and, you know, the issue of uranium water milk oil in the lake came up. This is something that we've been looking at for, I don't know, since a long time. I won't tell you how long exactly, because then I might have to confess all the way in. So I won't do that. But nonetheless, we've been, you know, uranium water milk oil has been a problem in the area since the 80s. And it's an invasive plant species, which means it, you know, just like weeds, they get into the ecosystem and they take over, they crowd out other native plants. And, you know, in the case of Lake George, we have environmental impacts from that, just from the growth of the uranium water milk oil. But you know, so then it's like, well, what do we do to try to control those things? And that's been an ongoing issue in the area, in many lakes, for a very long time. So, back in the days that we're not talking about, we partnered with the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District on a number of projects to monitor water quality. We did this as a educational project. So in other words, we had students who participated in several summer courses where we would take them out and we would measure all kinds of parameters for water quality indicators, of which there are many. And as a result of that work, we had developed a plan, looking at the trends in the data to monitor for septic systems contamination. So that was, that has been our experience. And along the way, we're also looking at what the impact of changing concentrations of these water quality indicators did to growth of invasive species. And the two that we really focused on at the time were Eurasian water milk oil and also fecal mussels. Right? So those were also water problems. And we did this with Missouri. We worked on one lake for the longest period that we worked on projects with. Lake Sunnyside, Costima Lake, and Lake George. So we have a long history with the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. Dave, which you probably all know used to be the head of that agency, so that's where this whole collaboration came to be. So that being said, although there are other invasive species of concern, this project was really to look at water milk oil. Notice it was found in Lake George in 1985. That doesn't mean it appeared in 1985. It could have been there for a while, probably was, but in 1985 it was noticed that it was becoming large and invasive. It's a unique plant in terms of its ability to, basically move into the environment and took over pretty much everything. And since the 1990s, most of the area lakes have been working on ways to manage the zebra water, both problems, the zebra mussel and Eurasian water. So I borrowed this from the Lake George Park Commission reports, which has to do with the harvesting of Eurasian water milk oil, which is the two plans that Lake George is currently using. One was the benthic mats, right, to lay down, basically a barrier kind of thing, which did help, but it also blocks the growth of other native species, so there's a problem using that. And then harvesting, so using scuba divers to go out with a big vacuum cleaner and suck up the Eurasian water milk oil. And you can see from the data that was provided in this report for 2020, so you notice in the first data here, the 2018, I just took some of this data. You know, there were a few sites that were tested. Notice that almost 50,000 pounds of Eurasian water milfoil were removed from a limited number of sites. In 2019, that amount doubled because the number of sites that were being harvested increased also. And in 2020, it's more than doubled again in terms of how much plant material is being removed from the lake using this method. And you can see the sites there are the sites where the milfoil problem has impacted recreational use of the lake. I mean, they're very large mats at this point, and so that's where all of that came from. But, you know, I just wanted to point out that the problem isn't going away, right? And this is the harvesting. When we were out doing our studies, we were there on site with the scuba harvesters, and you can see, you know, they suction it up, they put it into these large things to drain off the water, and then all of that material is offloaded off the boats and taken off to, I don't know where. They just magically disappeared. So I suspect it's going into a landfill or something along those lines.
Yeah, we manage multiple different sites. Roger, our operations supervisor. Positive, mostly at town landfills.
Right, so I would imagine it makes for pretty good fertilizer on its own. However, you know, 20,000 pounds of this stuff, that's a lot. So, this was an article that was published in 1996. One of the things I did is we started to work on this project was to do a literature search or a deep dive to find out what we knew about Eurasian water milfoil, especially in the Adirondack region, and then what we knew about the impact, the long-term impact of harvesting in general, because it turns out that when I did the search, you know, it's recognized as a way to decrease or diminish the amount of oil, but what is the impact of that? Nobody had looked at what the impact of actually pulling all that stuff out and the method that was being used. What does that do to water quality? And that's actually what our main focus was. So this article was published, notice Larry Eichler, who worked with RPI for a very long time, was one of the authors on this paper, and actually he's published quite a bit on this, where, you know, what they wanted to find out was what was the impact on the milfoil when it came to harvesting. Did it make a difference? And you can see that it does. So for the short-term management, it will decrease the amount of milfoil for any given season, but the thing is, it grows back and it gets to do it again all over again the following year. So it reduces the amount, but it didn't actually do too much in terms of the native plants, but notice that it was not eradicated, obviously, because we're still doing this in 2022, and in 2023, because what happened is that it grows back in the beds where it was established originally, but then it also has spread, and actually, you know, part of the problem might be the harvesting method is one of the things that might grow. So we don't eradicate it, and you know, to prevent its dominance to recur, the program would have to continue. And so, you know, the big question here is, you know, what is environmental impact? What does harvesting do in terms of, you know, the overall environment? And that's a big question because we're talking about ecology, and that's the relationship between, you know, living things. And removing one living thing seems like it would be a good solution to that, but it has other impacts that maybe aren't so well measured. So that was really the goal of this project, was to find out some of those things. And again, this is it was a short-term pilot project, limited number of sites, but nonetheless, we are sharing the data. You can see that the trends and the data are consistent, which is always a good sign when you're looking at data. Okay, so by the way, this was our publication. Our project originally was, again, to come up with indicators that would show whether septic systems were, you know, putting contaminants such as E. coli or other things into the lake. And actually that was done with Lake Luzerne and a few And so that was, our original approach to the project. But as I said, to develop that project, we did, we looked at every possible water quality parameter that there was, right? So we did numerous testing and narrowed it down to 2 indicators, chlorine and E. coli, fecal bacteria, that do actually identify areas where there is septic contamination in the lake. But that wasn't this project, right? So we needed to go back and look for additional, what would be the most appropriate indicators. And so we had a couple meetings with Dave to say, what would be the most appropriate indicators for this. And so what we decided on was to look at these 2, nitrate and phosphate, which are very across-the-board standard indicators for water quality. They're limiting nutrients. So whether you remember your basic biology or not, every living thing needs these 2 chemical compounds to survive, right? So we need nitrate because we have to make DNA and protein. We need phosphate because we have to make ATP and cell membranes. And when I say we, just realize that I'm collectively, I'm not just talking about humans, I'm talking about every living thing. Bacteria, algae, microinvertebrates, the microanimals and big animals. Licorice doesn't have a champ or, like a really big thing, or little thing, or did somebody see it, right? So, but if there was, they would also need nitrate and phosphate. So the point being, at a manageable concentration, everybody's fighting over the nitrate and phosphate is basically what it is. So it gets used up pretty quickly, and in a healthy lake, you can see what the levels of these are. And that's mg per liter, which you can also think of as parts per million, depending on how you like that. And I just wanted to give you some ideas of what a healthy lake would look like in terms of concentrations of these things. And you'll notice that the highest quality, the highest water quality is associated with fairly low levels of nutrients, which means that the nutrients are being processed by living things. There's still enough so that there isn't a whole lot of fighting going on. But you'll notice as the concentrations of them go up, that the water quality tends to go down. And that's because if you have more of these limiting nutrients, guess what? Life does what it wants, so it will process those nutrients, use it for further growth, and this is where overdose of things happen. This is where harmful algal blooms, if you want to, the HAPs that everybody's concerned about, that's one of the driving factors of those sorts of things too. So we chose nitrates and phosphate because these are, like I said, very stable parameters, and it also turns out that there are very good kits available to do this kind of testing because it is widely used internationally. These are standard indicators that are used in a company named Hawk, and actually several companies make kits, and we use those kits because we've used them in the past. Our goal was to make this a citizen science project. We were doing the septic indicators, and we wanted to keep it inexpensive, cost-effective, easy for somebody who doesn't have a lab and doesn't have laboratory equipment to be able to do. And the Hawk kits fit that bill beautifully, so we use those for that. We also looked at an indicator which is used most often for wastewater, and where you're seriously looking for more contamination. But nonetheless, it's a very good, it's a helpful indicator of anything. So it's called total suspended solids, or TSS, and as you might expect, it's a measure of how much particulate stuff is in the water column. Okay, so what are the particulate stuff? Organic material. So what's that? Decaying plant material, bacteria, plants, animals, all of those contribute to the amount of organic material in there. Clay, silt, other particulates that, when they are stirred up, you would notice as something that is called turbidity or cloudiness, right? So when there's a lot of suspended solids in the water, the water clarity will diminish, and that has impacts, right? Short-term and long-term impacts on the living things that are in that lake. So the way this test was done was to take a water sample and essentially filter it through a very fine pore filter so that the particulate stuff would be captured, but the dissolved solids, which is things like that contribute to alkalinity, salinity, those kinds of things, we're not measuring those, we're just measuring the particulate stuff. And the first time we did this in June, it was such a dramatic thing that I wanted to show you this. Notice that, you pour the water through that it filters the water through, and anything too big to go through the filter stays on the filter paper. So the first is the control, this distilled water. You can see that there's nothing on there. And then notice that at this one site, which was Commission Point, that we were there while they were harvesting. You could visibly see, the sediment bloom, if you will, there. So we took that water sample. And you can see that when filtered, it's obvious that there were quite a few suspended solids. And then notice post-harvest, it did come down, but it did not, there were still suspended solids that were present. And this is just one site, and I'm, basically going to show you the whole data set so that you'll see that this was consistent across the sites that we tested.
How many hours was post-harvest?
The next day.
The next day?
Like 24 hours or so. And that was, the best, what we could have done better, is the limitation, would be a week later, go back and do it again. But it was a very short-term project, and so that would be for the next time. You learn from the first time around. Yeah. Okay, so then we also did BOD, which is biological oxygen demand. This is a measure of dissolved oxygen. So everybody remembers in biology why oxygen is important for living things, right? Which is to process food and get energy from it. Aerobic organisms that are oxygen dependent require oxygen. Therefore, if there isn't enough, they're not able to, there's two things here. There's the stuff that they eat, and then there's the oxygen that is necessary to process it. So we measured dissolved oxygen at day 0, in other words, when you're on the lake, and then you measure it again on day 5 and compare the two values of dissolved oxygen, because the more use of the organic material by living things, and it's mostly bacteria at this point, right? Aerobic bacteria will eat the organic material using oxygen for that to make their ATP. So the more organic material, the more respiration, the higher the oxygen demand. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, looking at it from that perspective, it is a way to say, here's a lot of organic material in the, there is or is not a lot of organic material in the water that you're looking at. So again, just looking at standard values of what is considered healthy versus not, you can see that in, again, parts per million, mg per liter, low BOD between 1 and 2 is considered really great. And as the BOD goes up, it's very polluted. And what I can tell you is that wastewater, that 100 or more, we're talking 500 to 1,000 mg per liter, as opposed to a lake, essentially a lake like Lake George, where generally speaking the values are much lower for that, right? So those were our 4 sprinklers that we measured. Our process was to be taken out on a boat on Lake George in the summer. It was really hard, but and thanks to Captain Dave, who knew where these sites were located, because that was the other problem. And we just went out, we took water samples, put them on ice, brought them back to the lab at SUNY Adirondack, and we did all the testing at SUNY Adirondack. Okay, so this is the data. You can see that we went out generally, we went out one day, and then we went back the day after to do the post-harvest. And I just want to point out that pre-harvest, we did not go 3 days. Generally speaking, we went 2. So the pre-harvest, what that means, I used pre just because it fit very nicely in there. But it was, for the most part, a sample that was taken, 20 to 50 feet in the same location, but up current from where the harvesting was happening, so that we could have of comparison, right? So here's what it would look like when it wasn't being disturbed, here's what it looked like during harvest, and here's what it looked like the day after. The day after, we went back to the exact same sites using GPS coordinates, and we're able to take the post-harvest sample that way. So that's what those refer to. And you can see the sites that we used, right? 1 through 9, we did 9 total sites across 4 different dates, starting in June and going through August. So what I want to point out with the data is if you look at the pre-harvest, right, let's do phosphate nitrate, you'll notice, and this is the good news, right? So looking across at these indicators, the indicators indicate that the water quality is great. Okay, so in other words, the lake is a happy lake for the most part. Okay, so then harvest, you'll notice that again, the levels of the limiting nutrients went up significantly, and in a couple cases went up, almost to the point where, we're talking about impaired water quality. That would be the day of the harvest, but across the board, the trend is that all of these indicators went up. So in other words, the process of harvesting, put stuff, measurable stuff into the water, which has an impact on overall water quality. And again, this is very localized, okay, so it was just at these sites. So there's the data there, and then you can look at post-harvest. And you can see that for the most part, it looks like either the levels stayed, mostly they went down, okay? So in some cases, they went back down to where they were before. In others, they went down, but not back to baseline. And that's where the next week, right, the next week or even the next 2 weeks, that's where that would have been another really good piece of data to add to this. Okay, so once this was completely put together, once we had all the data on all the sites, I put it into this chart, and then you could actually see the trends, right? So once we have it in the spreadsheet, we can look across the board, and just in general, it does increase the concentration of phosphate nitrate. It increases the suspended solids, which are organic material, and it increased the suspended solids in the POD actually are indicators of what's in that water column at the time. So at each harvest site, it does stir up things that could lead to long-term problems. So especially the nitrate phosphate, we know that they increase the growth of aquatic plants, including, by the way, the milfoil, algae, microinvertebrates, other living things. What it's doing is disrupting the ecology of the water. And by that I mean not just the chemistry, but the biology. Because as you change these levels of chemicals, the biology shifts accordingly. So the ones who are better able to compete for these things and others are going to predominate. So, and that's where you have to worry about the harmful algal blooms because, between, obviously the temperature, water temperature is probably a major feature of that, but something triggers those algae to bloom, and the idea is that nutrient contributes to that quite a bit. So again, after we went back and checked, the indicator levels did decrease, but they did not, for the most part. Some cases it did, but mostly did not return to baseline. And something to point out is that we obviously things were going back, trending back down to baseline. However, we don't know where any of that stuff went. So especially suspended solids, BOD, where did their organic material go? Did it fall back down to the bottom? No, probably not. It didn't go back to where it was. It dispersed. And I do want to point out that, that dispersal includes organic material, which are bits and pieces of the milfoil. And the milfoil reproduces through vegetative propagation, which means you pull off a piece of it, put it someplace else, and it's very happy to settle down with roots and grow up otherwise. So this process does do that. That part is pretty clear. And again, if it's, how far those fragments and the suspended solids travel is unknown, that would require, definitely more equipment, more study, more time, and all of that stuff. So, and by the way, I want to say that this data is available Lake George is under constant study. There's many other sources of, they're looking not just at these parameters, but at others as well. So, we just focused on this small piece of it, but in terms of other water quality indicators, there's plenty of data out there for people to access. And that, pretty much sums up what we did and what we found. So the conclusion, I think it's safe to say that harvesting using scuba and suction does have an environmental impact on the lake. What the long-term impacts are is unknown. Manipulating the populations of plants and manipulates the populations of bacteria and everything else. And as a microbiologist, I feel that I need to say that just like humans, which I hope everybody knows, humans have a microbiome. We're full of bacteria. The bacteria are, dynamic and trying to keep us in good health. Every ecosystem has a microbiome, has bacterial populations. And just like with humans, when you do things to disrupt that, you also disrupt the bacterial microbiome. And they're major players in this process. That would be a great study to do on another year, another day, would be to look at the microbiome of the lake. But I'll stop talking about that because, like I said, that's just my personal interest in that. Okay, so anybody have any questions or thoughts? Yes.
I just would like you to tell me what's the relationship between the biological oxygen nutrient and dissolved oxygen in water?
So dissolved oxygen is what we measure. So we measure it as soon as you take the water sample, you measure how much oxygen is in the water. Right. And then you just take that and put it in a nice lovely place where it's at the right temperature. And the bacteria will, that are present in that water will grow. And they'll use oxygen to break down any organic material that's there. So you measure it at day 0, you measure it at day 5.
The DO?
Yes.
And then to get that BOD?
Yes. It's the difference between the two.
Thank you.
Okay. So in other words, what we're saying is that the dissolved oxygen depends on how much organic material there is, how much eating the bacteria are doing. And if there's more organic material, there's more to eat, and the demand for oxygen will be higher because of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Would you mind just repeating the cause of harmful algal blooms? Is it a precondition that then gets sparked by increased nutrients? Or is it caused by nutrient loading?
Okay, so I got to tell you that harmful algal blooms are not actually algae. They're bacteria. Okay? It's cyanobacteria. So I have to say that out loud because I'm a microbiologist. Okay. So point being, when you feed them, with the phosphate bacteria in particular, the more of those limited nutrients there are, the greater the growth of those things. And nobody knows what the algae are present. Okay, these are not exotic things. They're present in every water supply. Okay, so the difference being that when the conditions change, so I truly think that a major factor is temperature. So as the temperature increases, as nutrient concentrations change, bacteria, just like most other things, so bacteria are really good at this, sense that, and they will regulate their gene expression. So in other words, they'll shut off some things, turn on other things. And the problem with the harmful algal blooms is that when they are triggered to do that, they turn on these pigments, right? So that people will see a color in the water, but they are toxic to some things. I mean, at high concentrations, they can be very toxic. So it is, the algae are they're in this big relationship with all kinds of other living things. And when that dynamic changes, they step up and they're like, okay, so either it's limiting to them in terms of this is stressful to me, therefore I need to turn on my superpowers, or it's like, oh, look, there's all this stuff available. Let's turn on my superpowers so that I can take advantage of it. And that question has not been answered yet.
So, and is the reason why they tend to show up more in the fall that they're saying, oh wow, this is really unusual for us. So they turn up in warm temperatures in the fall, right?
Looking at the data across the board, just in general.
I mean, not always.
I think temperature is a major factor. And whether they like that or it stresses them out and they turn on their superpowers as toxigene, that part the signal is not really well understood yet.
But not necessarily in a very hot summer.
No, that's the thing, we don't know exactly why they do that, so the trend is, as the temperatures go up, they tend to do that, but I also believe there's other factors, there's always other factors, it's never, in ecology, there's never just one answer to anything. So this happens, then this, and then the harmful algae decide they want to turn on their superpower.
Do you think the thermocline in the fall has anything to do with it, or is it too far now?
Well, our sites were not on the deep. The invert, they're mostly, you wouldn't be able to see them at the surface unless they were at the surface.
Yeah.
So, believe it or not, these bacteria also, they're photosynthetic, so they produce these pigments and they can make their own food, but they also have to use oxygen, right? So as they're doing that, they're also using oxygen. So that has an impact on the living things that that's coming to. Yes.
Did you do anything to modify the increased concentration of water quality indicators, i.e., for instance, you suction harvest on Thursday, came back on Friday, but Friday it was blowing 20 knots out of the north, and Thursday it was calm?
Mostly the conditions were consistent from the day of harvest to the day after the harvest. I don't think there were any days where we weren't at least, we didn't have the 40-mile-an-hour gale winds, we didn't have really bad weather. There's one day where it was a little sketchy, but we did it before the thunderstorm started kind of thing. But so I would say it was, Dave, do you agree? Pretty consistent from one day.
Yeah, we knew we were going to do 2 days in a row, so we looked at the weather, make sure we had 2 calm days, just for ease of sampling and just for consistency.
Right.
I would kind of piggyback on that question and say, is there anything natural that takes place in the lake that causes disruptions of this nature that have, what would that be? Just wind? People, obviously dredging, if that is even allowed in any place. But
right. The benthic mats would have done that. I mean, it's a very dynamic ecosystem. So generally speaking, once things get established, it takes something to perturb, but those happen all the time. So
one thing I see in Hart Bay, we're reasonably shallow, is boats kind of doing their tour of the bay.
Yeah.
And that prop, instead of being horizontal, is this way now because they're half on plane. And it really does make a difference in the clarity of the water.
Yeah.
You can see into the bottom of Hart Bay, usually 10 or 12 feet. If on a day where the boats are running in the midsummer, that may be down to 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just prop wash, basically.
Yeah, so they're doing the same thing that the harvesting, which is stirring up that sediment and whatever. And I want to point out that we just measured something. So in that, in the stuff that gets stirred up, obviously everything increased, but there's a lot of other things that could possibly be increased as well, which we did not measure. So that would be, again, another interesting project would be, say, let's look across the board. What are the chemical compounds in there? We could do chemistry to figure out what are the different levels of chemicals that, some of which might be considered toxins or rubber chemicals or things like that. And I think somebody is doing that, right? On the lake, there's IBM is monitoring.
The Jefferson Project has multiple different types of monitoring going on the lake, correct?
Right. So I don't know exactly what because you can't find a lot of information on that, but nonetheless. So someday that data will be available and hopefully will be very useful to looking at the big picture and just saying, all right, these are things that we can actually manage well.
Looking at all of your numbers and the scales that you presented, all 4 of these, I was surprised, especially day of harvest, that they were as low as they are, and that they weren't even, and for the most part, they weren't even reaching the level, they were still within the level of an excellent
Yep.
water quality.
Right.
Which really surprises me because I've seen what it looks like those days.
Right.
And I would have expected, all right, were you surprised by that? And were there any other surprises? Were there any surprises in this data? That's the biggest surprise to me.
Well, that was, I wasn't surprised because going into it, you just don't know what to expect, right? So the trends that I saw were, obviously doing the suctioning does actually have an impact, but it's not killing the lake,
It's a smaller impact.
But the problem, this was a one-time, it's like having your blood drawn and looking for indicators of that. It's at that moment, what's in your blood you can test for. Same idea, at that moment, here's what we saw. So what the long-term impacts of that are, that's still unknown, and it will remain unknown until, the project gets expanded, perhaps, I don't know. But I wouldn't say that I was surprised. I expected, I sort of thought that given, just the fact that you're stirring those things up, that there would be changes. The BOD was one that I found very, very interesting because that's biology, right?
Yeah.
And that, that one actually, I took a step back and I was like, oh, so yeah, we're really, and nobody else, bacteria are often, that's what they call it, algae, right? It's harmful algae, they're bacteria, right? So bacteria, the microbiome of the lake and all the rest of it, often not studied in, Lynn Hare, Conservation Study of Lynn Hare, used to do research on microinvertebrates, and she'll tell you the same thing. So these are in the, headed into the single cell larger group as opposed to bacteria, but nonetheless, these things have impacts on microscopic life, which have a huge impact on the ecosystem itself. And that part is still remaining unknown except for the BOD. Watching that, it's like, okay, so we are changing, the biology is changing.
Yeah, but even that, on day of harvest, I would have thought on day of harvest, you're stirring up so much crap that would have gotten out of that scale. The 1 to 2 you said is excellent still, even on when we abuse the lake as badly as we do that today.
Yeah.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
So Bill, the challenge with the protocol that we had out there was we were trying to get as close to the impacted area as possible without affecting in any way the diver safety or the operations on the boat. And we did have some challenges with that to get as close as we could because these are simply dipped off of the boat. It wasn't a 12-foot hole right under where the disposal was.
Right.
So when we said in the beginning, this was an effort to get a general understanding of what it was. Would this pass the Harvard University scientific methodology? No, it wouldn't. But it just, how does it feel, right? And so knowing that Lynn and Holly were trying to get the best sample they could off the side of the boat when the harvester was here, the diver was here, the discharge was over there, I know that definitely affected some of the outcome. So some of those results are, if we got right under the discharge, it would have been 10 times that amount. So we tried to keep it similar, like just to make it equal across the scale. We didn't want to get right under it at Commission Point and then stay 10 feet away in Warren Bay because then we're all over the map. So knowing that we couldn't get right under exactly where they were harvesting, we tried to keep it consistent next to that. So we know we were never in the center of the plume, we were always just on the outside of it. So these numbers, while consistent across the board, are not reflective specifically of the discharge plume that they have. So these would be less than. Okay.
We assume, because again, we don't have that data. But now we know what we need to do to get that data, and that's what pilot studies do. They show you, okay, so here's this information. Now let's do this, let's do that. Like I said, lie a week and see what happens after a week in that same location kind of thing.
And this is the broader conversation of, going back to Dean's question, is this one of the larger impacts on the lake? By my assessment, I think we're probably the second largest bottom impact of the lake, boating number 1, hands down. And then number 2, take a look at the work that is being accomplished by the partnership that's happening out there, which is we're working on 31 sites actively right now, totaling approximately 100 acres, right? So, and this is every year, sometimes twice per year, individual phase. So when we take that and we say, based on SUNY Adirondacks data, knowing that if anything, this is probably on the low side, to be fair. And then we're looking at this affecting 100 acres of Lake George in generally more discrete areas. Each year, really, we're always concerned about Harris Bay, which is one of our highly concerning sites. It's, the first notable HAB in Lake George. And we spend, until last year, more time in Harris Bay than anywhere else in Lake George, harvesting upwards of 30 acres in that bay in some years, in different spots around there, but traditionally the harvest is anywhere between 10 and 15 acres in Harris Bay. Bell Bay, up in the town of Putnam. We harvest 2 discrete areas that are about half of the size of the bay, and Bell Bay doesn't have a lot of circulation outside water coming into it, so that's concerning, not just for what's happening to the ecology, but water quality. I think that would be something that would be enhancing the challenges that we're seeing with increased algae growth. And we don't have the answers to those questions, but we know when we're trying to get an assessment of what is the best way to manage your milfoil in Lake George, we need to have a better understanding of all of the impacts from all of the methods. And this is kind of our first step of saying, what is it like if we take a look at a few different sites out there the day of and the day after, and then we try to extrapolate that across the areas that we're working on in Lake George. And again, this is in no way to go against our contract and say, man, you're messing it up. We're telling them exactly what to do, and they're doing it. But this methodology, if you spend any level of time watching the harvest operations, you know that the water is turbid around their sites. And if they're doing acres at a time, and they're doing that for year after year, if you take a look, going back Sunset Bay, they've harvested since 1989 at some level, almost annually. Same thing with Harris Bay, Northwest Bay, all of these things. So we just have to go into our discussions of milfoil management in Lake George with eyes wide open as to whatever management technique we're using. It's going to have some level of impact, and we just need to understand that.
So, yeah, I'm thinking, talking about boats, Harris Bay probably has the biggest collection of the biggest boats on the lake. And they're going out of there every day, as we all know who've ever been in Harris Bay. I'm thinking that would be the bay to put down 5-mile-an-hour buoys on all the way out to the end of the points and get those big boats down off their planes so they don't stir up the bottom.
There's a pretty large 5 mile an hour zone now.
Oh, yeah.
About half the way.
It's going to take me a long time to get to dinner.
Those people never leave the dock, Bill, you know that. They sit down there at the dock and they talk with their buddies and eat, and that's that.
The post-harvest was going back to the actual place. Did you try and get to the exact suction point that they were harvesting?
Are you talking about during the...
No, after.
After, yeah, we tried to get it back
Post-harvest,
exactly.
you didn't go back to you tried to get to the actual point where they were actually harvesting the milfoil?
We tried to, yeah.
As close as we could to the GPS coordinates, because we did take GPS.
Yeah.
So it was the same spot
Yes.
that you
Yep.
each sample.
Each time. So the only thing that was different was what I call pre-harvest, which was typically, we didn't go out 3 days, we didn't do it the day before, because there was no day before. I mean, they're pretty much harvesting nonstop, so we did it upstream, up current from, 20 feet, 30 feet away. So that was the that's the baseline read. That's what we use for baseline reading.
Thank you for the presentation. And I did have a question on where the samples were taken. So they were in the water column near the surface?
Yeah, so the first time we went out, we took 2 samples, one at 2 feet and one at 6 feet. And it turns out they were exactly the same. So we just sort of went with one, and that was, I would say, about 3 feet now. So.
Wait, is that on
6 feet, yeah, because we used a grab sampler and you can set the distance, so.
And then a question, you check for phosphate. Just wondering why phosphate, because a lot of times total phosphorus or the soluble reactive phosphorus. So I just wondered about that. And then, the lake itself, the total phosphorus is around 5 micrograms. So this is milligrams, so we're looking...
Per liter, so it's part per million.
Right. So we're looking, these seem higher than the typical, the total phosphorus. So I just had a question on why the phosphate and not total phosphorus. So I didn't really ask that.
What most phosphorus does is it becomes phosphate, just naturally as a polyatomic ion. So there was that. Number two, the main decision point was what's going to be the most cost-effective, straightforward way to measure that. And because certainly the phosphorus was, they do have a kit for that as well. But it's just more stable in this form. So given that we were not doing it on site, that we had to transport it back to the lab, we chose that. And, phosphate is pretty standard in terms of, we use EPA methods for all of those. And that's pretty much, just the standard procedure for that. And that would be a great addition to add more data, would be to look at the different forms of phosphate and nitrate, by the way, it's the same thing, right? Nitrogen, nitrate, and the different chemical forms of those things, which is what chemistry comes with.
And, it would be interesting, I appreciate and understand where Dave is coming from about disrupting operations. We know that the cyanobacteria really reside in the sediments, so they come out. It'd be interesting to see from that discharge if there were any cyanobacteria. There could be a rat sample, not to disrupt A and regular features. That would be interesting.
It would be a very interesting follow-up and something that I agree would be good to know. So.
And you said the nitrate was at the level impacted?
Well, there was one, let's just go back here. So, in other words, at Huddle Bay, okay, so notice that we have one, which is like right on that borderline, right? So it went up, and here, that was 0.9. So it approaches the level of that good, but we never went over, the water quality was so good.
I'm wondering about that because, you got the village wastewater treatment plant has a discharge limit of 10 on nitrates. I'm just wondering where that determination of impact came from.
Okay, so based on standard, standard levels of water quality that are out there in the world, just in general. So not specific, but in general, that's what these things need to be. And every lake is different, and Lake Lake is a very unique lake. Honestly, it's not like a lot of other lakes. So you can't apply all these things across the board. But if you compare it to lakes, similar lakes, then you could add different value to that lake too. It adds up to the information that you have.
And what's a similar lake?
Skinny Atlas Lake, a couple of fewer lakes would qualify for that.
That goes fairly clear. I guess Atlas is considered
That's the closest one.
In New York, and they're doing this kind of stuff too. So, and then Woonsocket, that we New Hampshire.
Not quite as clear, but very similar. It's a little larger, but yeah.
Right. So large, deep, and then not as big as the Great Lakes, obviously, but in other states, there's a few here and there that you can actually go out and find data for and compare to. And milfoil is a problem on most of them. Turns out.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, surprise. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
I'd like to add one more point about Lynn and Holly. They did this on their own personal time, which is fantastic.
Wow.
Basically just getting reimbursed for the material, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll take a collection up for you.
Thank you.
No, it's really interesting. The payment was you had to go out on the boat and sit out in the sun and ride around and look at stuff. So that was well worth it. So,
I just took that daughter's school.
I signed my whole thing.
Joe's not buying it, Ken. We're not going to see it.
It's the same color.
For the record, I was here a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Will we do it again? Will we get it funded? Will we?
It wasn't a funding thing because they were happy
Yeah, I
to
know.
do it. So, yeah.
But it
If there's a
gave us some
funding,
food for thought, for sure.
what I'd really like to do is find a better way to be impactful to them and get the actual discharge sample to them. But, this was good and consistent.
Right. That's a good start.
It was, absolutely.
We're done, Kevin.
I'll listen to any motion that anyone wants to present. Any given, it looks like item 4 has been removed from the agenda. The applicant has decided to experiment with more design before he asks for it.
Do we still have the project review actions report, Tom?
You asked me that same thing, I think, 30 days ago. So
He's trying to keep you honest.
I'll expect it next month.
Every month.
Say, how's it going on the answer?
If that's what you'd like to hear, then why don't we do that? Joe, do you have, anybody have the project action report?
Yeah, I do. Where's it, Dave? Okay. Resolution 2023-01, accept the project review action report. Whereas the commission has received and reviewed the project review action report prepared by the staff and dated January 17, 2023. And whereas the project review committee recommends acceptance of the project review action report, now therefore be resolved that the commission directs the project review action report be incorporated in the minutes of the full commission meeting. So moved.
Motion's made.
Second.
Motion seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, signify.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, it's passed. The variance request is removed. And item 5, septic system inspection program update by Mr. Tuen.
Chairman, and good morning, everyone. As you're all aware, following an 18-month great collaborative effort, last month the Commission accepted some new wastewater regulations that establish a wastewater inspection program. We have also received DOH approval and DEC approval is pending. As you know, they need to be approved by both of those agencies. And staff is preparing to implement this program for this year, which is exciting and has had us all very busy. So just want to bring you up to date on the effort. As you know, the program involves the inspection of roughly 2,700 systems to try to refine who we understand is the responsible party. Dave's doing a lot of work and outreach along with Jason, trying to find responsible management entities or community systems. Think Cannon Point or Green Harbor. So rather than reach out to dozens and dozens of landowners, there might be a single point person there that we can work with. And there might be some, inspection processes in place that mimic what we're looking to do, so we can sort of create a little efficiency there. Along these lines, we're working on outreach. We'll be sending out mailing to all affected landowners next week to give them a heads up on the program, advise them of the new regs and the standards and the upcoming billing. This is particularly important for the folks that aren't accustomed to billing, such as the upland landowners who aren't used to doing, an annual dock billing. With respect to billing, it's been all hands on deck. We're trying to create an online payment system for not just boats, but also docks and septic. Try to create a little efficiency and convenience for landowners. And also, hopefully down the road, that might be a means for folks to establish contact with the commission and set up their own inspection. So just go online and set up your inspection, and we'll show up. So that's been absolutely every single staff member, countless hours from Commissioner Joe Stanek. He's been lending us his data management expertise, which is certainly appreciated. And that billing will be this year. So we're taking that existing billing process and adding to it the septic. So we're going to try to be efficient so not to bill septic bill. Trying to organize together so something staff that can work on it on a daily basis. So kind of going through these over these little hurdles to implement this program, which has been totally fun. So I talked about, the online bill pay. Oh yeah, and then program logistics. So as you know, each of the septic systems need to be inspected every 5 years. One of the programs we keep on getting asked, or questions we keep on getting asked, is how we're going to implement that. Obviously, we don't want to overwhelm any individual municipality So essentially 1/5 of the systems will be inspected each year, so that way we're not doing all of them in Queensbury and potentially sending a lot of permit work to them. And then to try to create and facilitate some cooperation among neighbors, we tried to group, neighborhoods together into single years, so that way maybe a hauler could take out, 2 tanks, neighboring tanks in the same neighborhood, and perhaps create a little conversation and assistance there. We have been working with the Department of Budget and Civil Service to establish new positions for the inspectors. We're going to hire 3 new inspectors. They're going to be engineering tech 2s, making roughly $22.50 an hour. We have a couple of great candidates, which we're excited about to bring on board, who have experience in this, which will certainly be, a great benefit to the program. And to help get them around in the field, we have a request in to buy 2 new vehicles, Toyota Camry hybrids, in line with the state's policy of, higher mileage or, better efficiency vehicles. And then we're going to get a used vehicle from OGS down in Albany. And that's the brief overview, and conveniently segues into our next agenda item, unless there are any questions.
Thank you. How are we continuing to keep our partner communities, municipalities involved and interested?
Yeah, so Dave's been reaching out to all the supervisors, keeping them apprised of the process, working with local codes folks to try to learn as much about these community systems as we can, and letting them know that, the program's on the way. And also, asking questions, making sure that, the wastewater facilities are going to be ready and can accept our haulers taking the effluent. So far it's all been positive feedback, great communication, and looks like we'll be getting started here. Tentative start date is May 1st, and we anticipate bringing on the new inspectors about mid-April to do training and get them geared up.
Anybody comments?
I know that originally part of the funding for this was the fees that we charge people. In the process of refining the program, is there needs from the state or communities, and are you having any trouble with that, if that's the case, getting funding through the state?
So we're hoping that this can be a self-supported program by the user, similar to the rest of the programs we run. So despite refining the numbers, as I said, we're still at the same number of individuals that will be paying, so roughly 2,700. So the anticipated income of $50 per year for the residential systems will totally support the 3 technicians that we plan on bringing on. So the hope is that we won't need any funding from the state or the municipalities for this program.
With the exception of the vehicles that we're hoping to get. So we requested $50,000 for equipment for this program. Mm-hmm. The money that we get, the only money the commission receives is 95% boat and dock registrations, and our project money is solely Environmental Protection Fund, and DPF, as you know, cannot support state staff. So we did not need or seek any funding for staffing, but we thought they could be helpful in providing some funding for the vehicles, and we're going to also be purchasing some equipment to make sure that when the hauler is there, if we need a specific piece of equipment, a camera, a sensor, whatever else it might be, if that smaller hauler may not have that correct equipment, we should have it within our existing staffing. So that's going to accommodate the ballpark $50,000. So Roger's been working with Joe Johns. Thanks to Joe for putting together a great business case for the vehicles that need to be sent down to Albany. Those vehicles are going to come in about, $57,000 ballpark for 2 of them. We're only requesting $50,000 out of the DPF reimbursement. However, the trust fund right now is in pretty good condition in terms of our carryover from last year, so we should have no challenges fiscally.
Hybrids, did I hear the word hybrids?
Both hybrids.
Calculator on here, but I can't
That's a good
find
idea.
it.
Yeah, they're almost 50 miles to gallon, which is fantastic. So 2 gallons up and back.
I wouldn't call it fantastic, but it's better than...
Pretty good.
Wow.
It's not a Tesla, but we can't afford it.
Kathy, you had a question?
I just have a question concerning the reporting that the local papers have done on the Lake George Village wastewater treatment plant, and how concerned they were about the Skimmerhorn development and what an impact that would have on it. Are we all set as far as our haulers being able to dispose of, the cleaning out the septic systems at the Lake George plant? Are we okay on that now?
Yeah, Dave might be able to speak to this a little better than I can. I don't know all the nuts and bolts, but my understanding is the village is extremely supportive of the program. They will be able to accept haulers, and we're aiming to coordinate with them so that way, the folks associated with this program will have a spot to bring their septic.
Okay, but
David, we checked with Ticonderoga to see if I'm pretty sure they're already accepting.
They do accept, the haulers say it's quite a bit more expensive than the Lake George plant, so they tend to come south when they can. But yeah, we've spoken to every wastewater treatment plant operator from Albany north just to talk about their accommodations for our program. I think everybody knows Lake George has some challenges with the treatment plant right now, but they're working on that. But in a conversation that we had between the mayor and the hopefully pending mayor and a few other folks, and certainly Tim Shutt, they said they're going to be able to accommodate our program, and we're going to be working with them on scheduling to ensure that if a hauler is coming, they don't end up all the way down in Albany, which would throw off our afternoon inspections. So these are all the details that most of the public will never know. It's taken some effort, but the village is definitely on top of the situation, and they're being very accommodating to make sure our program can work.
Good. So I won't have to beat up on Tracy too much.
Question here?
Thank you. I understand, that that about 500 sites will be inspected each year, and that will be spread over the municipalities. But our experience but I also understand that the responsibility for making sure if something needs to be fixed will be with the towns, that they will have to supervise any repairs that need to be done. And unfortunately, our experience has been that enforcement is a real problem because of staffing, and even in Queensberry, that enforcing of town codes is practically non-existent. So I don't know if you're working with the towns, can they really handle the load of making sure that the septic systems are properly repaired?
So, yeah, I can respond to that. So this is a commission program with commission regulations and, employed by commission staff. And if staff identifies that the system needs to be repaired, it'll be the commission following up to ensure compliance, just as with all other programs.
Okay, so then that's a change, because before I think we were under the assumption that it was going to be the towns that had to make sure that the repairs were properly.
So if there's any permit that's required for construction, that remains in the municipality. So say you need a completely new system, the commission says you have to do it by date certain, you still have to go to the town to get that permit, because the commission that's enforcing the timelines.
And that's reassuring.
It's going to be learn as we go along. 5 years from now, who's ever in this room will wonder how the heck those guys pulled this off.
Perseverance is a wonderful
We didn't
fact.
start at zero, we started way below zero. This is an underground project.
I remember every lake that we talked to, Jason pulled together all the lakes in the state that do this, say the first 5 years is going to be terrible, just so you understand. It's going to be scheduling challenges and problems and everything else, but at the end of that period, you have a much better population of septic systems around Lake George, and the subsequent 5-year iterations are much more smooth because they know the program, their septics are upgraded, so we understand it's going to be a bumpy ride for a few years. But anecdotally, I've talked to several people that have noted, I think even Kathy called me yesterday, about a contractor that says they are so busy installing new septic systems around Lake George, they're straight out. I think there's a comment from Kathy, and I've heard that from several people on the design side. We work with the design community, Joe does every day, and they say we're seeing a real response to the idea that this is coming forward, so we think that's a good step right off the bat.
Very good. Looks like we have a resolution that we need to pass.
Okay, Resolution 2023-03. Whereas the Lake George Park Commission recently adopted regulations requiring the inspection of on-site wastewater treatment systems located within 500 feet of Lake George and 100 feet of tributaries of Lake George. Whereas the inspection program anticipates the Commission staff conducting inspections of approximately 550 wastewater treatment systems each season, beginning April 15th and ending October 15th, with all systems within the park having been completed within the first 5 years. And whereas the Commission staff have submitted a request, business plan, and justification to New York State OGS detailing the program's need and outlining the existing Commission vehicle ages, which average 14 years old, And whereas the commission had received approval from the Department of Civil Service to proceed with the hiring and employment of 3 seasonal positions, environmental engineer number 2, to serve as wastewater treatment systems inspectors, tasked with conducting inspections each day throughout the park. And whereas the inspection program requires the purchase of equipment and supplies to support the program, including 2 mid-size sedans to provide transportation of inspectors and commission staff throughout the park to implement the inspection program. And whereas the commission staff has investigated the types of vehicles available on state contract and determined that the vehicles best meeting the needs of the program and New York State fuel efficiency standards is the 2023 Toyota Camry LE Hybrid. Now therefore be resolved, the commission authorized the executive director to sign a purchase order for the purchase of and delivery of 2 2023 Toyota Camry LE Hybrid consistent with the state contract pricing and at a cost not to exceed $57,000 consistent with the New York State finance law and contingent upon approval by New York State OGS and New York State Division of Budget. So moved.
Second.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion, any questions amongst the commissioners? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays, we will adopt that resolution.
So you're going to need a plug-in on the building.
We're talking about it now.
Are these cars going to include exterior boot racks? I was a kid on my uncle's farm, and I know what it meant to take your boots off on the porch.
Don't go down in the hole, that's what we come. Guy in the hole is when it's in trouble.
Commissioner Floyd, we didn't have a law enforcement committee meeting this morning.
Right.
But do we have any highlights that we need to mention at all?
No, everything is
Okay.
fine. The Law Enforcement Committee did not meet, so there'll be no report today.
Check another one off. We're at number 7, public comments. Now, hopefully some of you have already made some public comments, and you're lucky at these small meetings we don't say, no, sit down and wait to speak at the end. Today you were welcome to speak during the meeting, and anybody have anything they'd like to offer their sage advice or comments on? Hearing none.
Looks pretty
Dan,
quiet.
I just wanted you guys to know that Holly Ahern is also an amazing authority on Lyme disease.
On
Lyme disease.
Lyme disease.
Back in the day when it was so pervasive, like 10 years ago in this area, she I know it has nothing to do with what we're doing today, but I just wanted to make that comment. She really knows her business on that, too.
Good to know.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Hearing no
Wait
discussion.
until for 5 minutes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Until the next time.